Your dad came home at 5:30 every evening. Same time, every day. One job. 40 hours a week. And somehow, it was enough to pay the mortgage, feed the family, keep a car in the driveway, and even save a little bit. One job. One income. One family supported. How the hell did that work? Let me take you back to 1980. Not with rose-colored glasses. Not with nostalgia that makes everything seem perfect. Just the facts. The numbers. The reality of how money worked back then. Because here's the thing. People in 1980 weren't making huge salaries. They weren't rich. But somehow, one regular job at a regular company doing regular work was enough to support an entire family. Your dad, or maybe your mom, though usually it was the dad because that's just how it was in 1980, went to work. Factory job, office job, sales job, whatever. Nothing fancy. And that one paycheck paid for everything. The house, the car, the groceries, the utilities, the kids' clothes and school supplies. Sometimes even a family vacation once a year. How? That's what we're going to figure out today. Not with complicated economic theories or political arguments. Just simple math. Simple comparisons. Looking at what things cost, what people earned, and how those two numbers related to each other in a way that seems almost impossible now. Because something fundamental has changed between 1980 and today. And understanding what that is, understanding what made one job enough back then, might help us understand why 2 or 3 jobs often aren't enough now. So let's dig in. Let's look at the numbers. Let's see how a regular American family in 1980 made it work on one income. First, let's talk about money. How much did people actually make in 1980? The median household income in 1980 was about $17,700. That's median, meaning half of families made more, half made less. Right in the middle. Now, before you think, that's nothing, remember, we're comparing $1,980 to 1980 prices. That's the key. You can't just convert it to today's money and call it a day. You have to look at what that money could actually buy. Let's break it down by job. Real numbers from real jobs. A factory worker in 1980 might make $15,000 to $25,000 a year, depending on the industry and whether they were union. That's about $7 to $12 an hour. A teacher made around $15,000 to $20,000 depending on the state and experience. A police officer or firefighter pulled in $18,000 to $25,000. A secretary or office worker made $10,000 to $15,000. A manager at a retail store made maybe $20,000 to $30,000. These aren't huge numbers. But watch what happens when we look at what things cost. Let's start with the big one, housing. The median home price in 1980 was $47,200. Yeah, under 50 grand for a house. Now, here's the magic ratio that makes everything make sense. Take that median household income of $17,700. Divide the median home price by that. You get 2.67. That means the median house cost about 2.7 times the median household income. Hold that number in your head. We'll come back to it. A new car in 1980 cost around $5,000 to $7,000. A Ford Fairmont cost about $5,000. A Chevy Citation was around $5,800. A Honda Accord was $6,000. Remember, median household income is $17,700. So a new car cost about 1/3 of annual income. Maybe a bit less if you were making above median. Groceries for a family of 4 ran about $80 to $100 a week. That's roughly $4,000 to $5,000 a year. About a quarter of that median income. Gas was expensive in 1980. This was after the oil shocks of the 70s. You're paying about $1.19 per gallon. Sounds cheap now, but remember, minimum wage was $3.10 an hour. Still, filling up your tank cost maybe $15, $20. Not nothing, but manageable. Utilities, electric, gas, water, phone, ran maybe $100 to $150 a month. Call it $1,500 a year. Healthcare was cheaper too, though that was starting to change. If you had insurance through your job, and most full-time jobs offered it, you might pay $20 to $50 a month for family coverage. Maybe $600 a year. College tuition at a public university averaged about $800 a year. At a private school, maybe $3,500. Let's add this up for a typical family in 1980. Median income, $17,700. Mortgage payment on a median-priced home, with 10% down and a 13% interest rate, which was high about $550 a month, or $6,600 a year. Car payment on a $6,000 car, maybe $150 a month, or $1,800 a year. Groceries, $4,500 a year. Gas, $1,000 a year, assuming decent amount of driving. Utilities, $1,500 a year. Healthcare, $600 a year. That's $16,000 in basic expenses. You've got $1,700 left over from that median income. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's tight. That's not a lot of cushion. And you're right. Families in 1980 weren't living in luxury. They were careful with money. They budgeted. They didn't buy things they didn't need. But here's the thing, they made it work. On one income. And they still had enough left over to save a little bit, to take a modest vacation, to buy the kids some toys at Christmas. Now let's fast forward to today and see what's changed. The median household income in 2024 is about $75,000. That's roughly 4.2 times higher than 1980. Sounds good, right? We're making more money. But watch what happened to costs. The median home price in 2024 is around $420,000. That's 8.9 times higher than 1980. Remember that ratio we talked about earlier? In 1980, a house cost 2.7 times annual income. In 2024, it costs 5.6 times annual income. The house has gotten twice as expensive relative to income. A new car in 2024 averages around $48,000. That's about 8.6 times higher than 1980. That's 64% of median household income. In 1980, it was 34% of income. Groceries for a family of 4 run about $200 to $250 a week now. Call it $12,000 a year. That's about 2.4 times the cost in 1980 dollars. College tuition at a public university averages $10,000 a year now for in-state students. That's 12.5 times higher than 1980. Private universities average $40,000 or more. That's more than 10 times higher. Healthcare. Don't even get me started. If you're buying insurance on the marketplace, you might pay $500 to $1,000 a month for family coverage. That's $6,000 to $12,000 a year. In 1980, it was $600 a year. You see what's happening? Income has gone up 4.2 times. But housing has gone up 8.9 times. Cars have gone up 8.6 times. College has gone up 12.5 times. Healthcare has gone up 10 to 20 times. The costs have outpaced the income. That's the fundamental problem. That's why one job isn't enough anymore for most families. So what made 1980 different? Why could families survive on one income then when they can't now? It wasn't because people made more money relative to today. We just saw that incomes have actually gone up faster than most things. It's because the big expenses, the ones that really matter, were proportionally smaller. Let's talk about housing first, because that's the biggest expense for most families. In 1980, housing was affordable relative to income. That 2.7 ratio meant that if you were making a median income, you could reasonably afford a median house. The math worked. Why? Partly because there was more housing being built relative to population. Partly because financing was straightforward. You put down 10 to 20%, you got a mortgage, you paid it off. Partly because speculation in the housing market wasn't as crazy as it is now. Houses were seen as places to live first, investments second. Now it's often the reverse. Cars were simpler and cheaper to make. A 1980 car had fewer features, less technology, simpler emission systems. It was basically an engine, a frame, four wheels, and some seats. Maybe an AM/FM radio. No computers, no advanced safety features, no infotainment systems. And they lasted less time, sure. But they were cheap enough that you could replace them more often without breaking the bank. Healthcare is the big one where things have really diverged. In 1980, healthcare costs were a much smaller portion of GDP. Medical technology was simpler. Drugs were cheaper. Insurance companies weren't as consolidated. Hospitals weren't run like corporations. The system was far from perfect, don't get me wrong, but it was more affordable. College was seen as a public good that should be accessible. State governments subsidized public universities heavily. Tuition was kept low intentionally. The idea was that an educated population benefits everyone, so everyone should be able to afford it. Now, state funding has been cut dramatically, and universities make up the difference by charging students more. But there's something else too. Something about expectations and lifestyle. People in 1980 lived smaller. The average new home in 1980 was about 1,740 square feet. Today it's over 2,500 square feet. That's 44% bigger. Families had one car, maybe two. Today it's often 2 or 3. People ate out less. Way less. Fast food was a treat, not a routine. Restaurants were for special occasions. You didn't have cable TV bills, $100 plus a month. Internet bills, $50 to $100 a month. Cell phone bills, $100 to $200 a month for a family. Streaming services, $50 plus a month for multiple services. Those expenses didn't exist. You didn't buy new clothes as often. You didn't upgrade your phone every 2 years. You didn't have as much stuff, period. Life was simpler in many ways. Less convenient, sure. Less connected. Less entertaining. But also less expensive. There's this idea of the American middle-class dream, right? The house with the white picket fence, the car in the driveway, the 2.5 kids, the dog, the whole package. And in 1980, that was actually achievable for a regular person with a regular job. You didn't need to be exceptional. You didn't need advanced degrees or specialized skills. You just needed to show up, do your work, be reliable. The system was set up so that a normal job paid enough to support a normal life. Think about what that meant psychologically. What it meant for families. Dad, or occasionally mom, but usually dad, went to work. One job. Came home at a reasonable hour. Wasn't stressed about money constantly. Wasn't working weekends or side hustles or second jobs. Mom, and yeah, this is going to sound dated, but this was the typical arrangement. Stayed home or worked part-time. She managed the household, raised the kids, was there when they got home from school. I'm not saying this was perfect. I'm not saying this was fair or that it should be the model for everyone. But it was sustainable. The economics of it worked. The family spent time together. They had dinner together most nights. They weren't both exhausted from working multiple jobs. They weren't drowning in debt. There was stability, predictability, the sense that if you worked hard and followed the rules, you'd be okay. And for a lot of people, not everyone, let's be clear, but for a lot of people, that was true. Compare that to now. Most families need 2 incomes just to cover basic expenses. And even with 2 incomes, they're often struggling. Drowning in student loan debt. Can't afford to buy a house. Living paycheck to paycheck. The middle class is being squeezed. That comfortable middle ground where one regular job was enough? It's shrinking. So what happened between 1980 and now? Why did this change? Housing got expensive. We talked about this. The ratio of home prices to income doubled. There are lots of reasons: zoning laws limiting new construction, increased demand, speculation, cheap credit inflating prices. But the result is the same: houses are less affordable. Healthcare exploded in cost. We went from spending 9% of GDP on healthcare in 1980 to 18% now. That's double as a share of the economy. Insurance got more expensive. Drugs got more expensive. Hospital stays got more expensive. Someone's paying for all of that, and it's us. College stopped being affordable. State funding dried up. Universities built fancy facilities and hired more administrators. Students had to borrow more and more to pay for it. Now the average student loan debt is over $30,000. That's a mortgage payment every month that earlier generations didn't have. Wages stagnated for a lot of workers. Real wages, meaning wages adjusted for inflation, haven't grown much for the bottom 50% of earners. The median wage has grown, but slowly. Meanwhile, costs for big-ticket items have soared. Childcare became a massive expense that barely existed as a line item in 1980. Back then, one parent stayed home or you had family nearby to help. Now, if both parents work, you need childcare. And that costs $1,000 to $2,000 a month per kid. That's a whole salary just for childcare. Lifestyle inflation happened too, let's be honest. We have more stuff. We spend more on entertainment and technology and convenience. Some of that is just the world changing. You need internet and a cell phone now in ways you didn't in 1980. But some of it is choice. Still, even if you cut all the lifestyle expenses, even if you live as frugally as someone in 1980, the math doesn't work the same way. The big expenses, housing, healthcare, education, have gotten so much more expensive relative to income that it's hard to make it on one salary. Now, I want to be careful here. I don't want to romanticize 1980. Life wasn't perfect then. Lots of people struggled. Poverty existed. Discrimination existed. Economic opportunities weren't equal for everyone. And there were trade-offs. Houses were smaller. Cars were less safe and less reliable. Medical care was less advanced. Technology was primitive. Entertainment options were limited. If you got sick, your treatment options were limited compared to now. If your car broke down, it might be days before you could get back on the road. If you wanted to learn something, you had to find a book or a class. You couldn't just Google it. Life was less convenient, less comfortable in many ways. But economically, purely economically, the math worked better for working families. One income could support a household. You could save for retirement. You could buy a house in your 20s or early 30s. You could have kids without bankrupting yourself. That basic financial stability, that's what's been lost for a lot of people. And it's not because people today aren't working hard. It's not because they're lazy or entitled or whatever criticism gets thrown around. It's because the fundamental economics have shifted. The relationship between what you earn and what things cost has changed in ways that make life harder. So what's the point of all this? Why am I taking you through these numbers and comparisons? Because I think it's important to understand that the struggles people face today, the fact that two incomes often aren't enough, that people can't afford houses, that they're drowning in student debt and medical bills, these aren't individual failures. The system worked differently in 1980. The economics were different. One job was enough because housing was affordable, healthcare was manageable, college was cheap, and wages went further. That's not the world we live in anymore. And maybe understanding that helps. Maybe it helps to know that your grandparents weren't superheroes with better money management skills. They just lived in a different economic reality where the numbers worked better. Maybe it helps to see that the reason you're working two jobs and still barely making it isn't because you're doing something wrong. It's because the math has changed. I don't have solutions here. I'm not going to tell you how to fix the economy or what needs to change. That's not what this video is about. This is just about understanding what was different. About seeing clearly how one job was enough in 1980 and why that's so hard to imagine now. Because sometimes, just understanding the problem is the first step. So there you have it. Why one job was enough in 1980. Not because people were better. Not because they had some secret we've lost. But because a house cost 2.7 times annual income instead of 5.6 times. Because a car cost 1/3 of annual income instead of 2/3. Because healthcare cost $600 a year instead of $12,000. Because college cost $800 a year instead of $10,000. Because the numbers worked in a way that made it possible for one regular income to support a regular life. That's the reality. That's what made the difference. And understanding that, that's worth something. Thanks for watching. Thanks for taking this journey with me through the economics of 1980. If this resonated with you, if it helped you understand something about how we got here, let me know in the comments. Share your family's story. Tell me what your parents or grandparents did for work and how they made it work. Because these aren't just numbers. They're lives. Real people making real choices in real economic conditions. And all of that matters. See you next time.